In September 2006, this British graffiti artist decided that he wanted to illustrate how often we tend to ignore big problems. So he painted this picture. Now you'll notice that the elephant is painted in the same bold pattern as the wallpaper, but you'll also notice how big the elephant is. So he painted the picture in such a fashion that to make the point that the elephant was so big you couldn't miss it, but if you didn't really want to look at the elephant, you could just kind of overlook it and let it blend in with the background. Hence the elephant in the room.
What happens to a culture when more than 50 dead and more than 500 injured is suddenly yesterday's news?
I think we lose something vital. Emotion often drives thought, and too much exposure to the same kind of violence reduces that emotional response.
Las Vegas, Charlottesville, New York, Sutherland Springs, historic storms in Texas, Puerto Rico, and Florida, and the list goes on and on. This has been a year marked by tragedy, impacting countless lives.
There's no better way to overpower a trickle of doubt than with a flood of naked truth.
Now to new allegations, though, against Kevin Spacey.
This as Hollywood movie mogul Harvey Weinstein could potentially face criminal charges on new rape allegations.
Now it comes off the back of a report in the New Yorker which claims Weinstein hired 2 security agency firms, one of which was Black Cube, to quiet those involved. Now the organisation reportedly uses former Mossad agents as well as operatives from Israel's elite military and government intelligence units.
It sounds more like a scene from a Hollywood thriller that Harvey Weinstein could have produced.
These are highly trained operatives who excel in using false identities, who construct front companies to cover for their false identities. This went very, very far.
This journalist contacted Rose McGowan, as well as Sopranos actress Annabella Sciorra, who recalled the suspicious conversation, saying to Farrow, "It scared me that Harvey was testing to see if I would talk."
And, you know, this was a deep-seated source of pain for a lot of people who were silent for too long.
Honesty is your best defense and offense.
The deception didn't end there.
Even as you and I sit here tonight, one of the great moguls of Hollywood is being shown for a life of repeated, constant debauchery. Really? An industry that has given us so much of that same type of living in your living room and mine suddenly finds a man was living that same thing out in private and was all of a sudden a disgraced individual. You know what it proves to me? You could be living with the most beautiful people around you. You could be living with the wealthiest people around you. You could be living in a setting that the world envies and longs to be with, and your heart can still be empty as you desperately pursue sensual or other types of pleasure to find some self-authentication and some meaning. That's your search. That's my search.
You sow a thought, you reap an act. You sow an act, you reap a habit. You sow a habit, you reap a character. You sow a character, you reap a destiny. But the destiny always begins with a thought. It all begins with the mind.
I hope that he knows that you cannot go around treating women the way you did for as long as you did and never pay a price for it. You know, you reap what you sow.
I have a very dear friend who sadly was charged with something that till this day he swears he never ever did. In fact, the charges were so ludicrous that he hired a sort of a low-paying attorney to defend him because the very accuser was so psychologically unstable.
That's what makes this so exciting and potentially so far-reaching.
he was sure he'd be walking out of that courtroom at the end of the trial. Instead, he was handcuffed and had only time enough to look at his wife and say, "I love you." And he was given a 35-year sentence. A few weeks later, I went to visit him in prison, and my whole body was sort of quivering when they put me in alone into a long corridor. One door shut behind me, another door shut behind me, huge iron doors slamming behind you. You're all alone in this corridor till you go up a set of stairs, and then there's a revolving gate, and there's a rather muscular looking security person standing, asking you for your name, that you'd been cleared. And I went in, sat across the glass. Within a few weeks, he wasn't even a shadow of himself. And all he could look at me and say, "I swear to you, I never did what they're charging me with. I cannot believe they've put me here for 35 years. He's desperately trying to get an appeal only so that the truth can be presented at the trial. Now, you may come and say, as rightly you may say, how do you know he's telling the truth? But you'll just reinforce the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that the truth matters. The truth matters. If only in one life, at the age of 70, you're put away for 35 years, you've saved all your money for your life with your wife to travel through the world in your retiral years, and all your money is now going and try to prove that you're innocent of all of this. It tells you, if one issue in life tells you and me truth matters, how much more important it is that the truth matters for life itself. Great degree of fear and uncertainty. The whole world lives like that. I turned 71 this year, and I've been an itinerant for over 40 years. I have never ever seen the world in such uncertain times. If you go to almost any major country, whether it's the Philippines or whether it's India or here and even France, and almost everyone will tell you they never expected for the current political situation to be a reality for them. They never expected the kind of leadership they presently have. And everywhere I go, they ask the question, what hope do you have to give us?
I always try to speak the truth in love. I really do. But this is really a burden on my heart because it's called this whole thing has caused way too much division and bitterness and anger and rancor, and it's why they can't even work together in Washington. They can't even work together for anything.
All the evidence, scientific, existential, philosophical, theological, 9 years. And the reason isn't because the answers were hard to find. The reason is because the answers were hard to embrace. There's a consequence to belief. I think we often forget this. I think in our hyper-rationalistic worldview, sometimes when we think about there are clear arguments, there's beauty in the words and all these things, that people come to these things with a blank slate.
Your worldview is a set of lenses through which you look at reality. Whether you think about it or not, you're always looking through those lenses. But here's the connection. One of my great heroes was a man by the name of Malcolm Muggeridge, probably considered by many one, if not the greatest journalist of the 20th century. He made these two comments on truth that are so perceptive. Listen carefully. Truth is very beautiful, more so I consider than justice, today's pursuit, which easily puts on a false face. In the nearly 7 decades I have lived through,
these things you see,
the world has overflowed with bloodshed and explosions whose dust has never had time to settle before others have erupted, all in purportedly just causes. The quest for justice continues and the weapons of hatred pile up. But truth was an early casualty. The lies of advertising, of news, of salesmanship, of politics, the lies of the priest in his pulpit, the professor at his podium, the journalist at his typewriter, the lies stuck like a fishbone in the throat of the microphone. He said this in the 70s, but then he made this remarkable statement which often we don't connect with the abstract notion of truth. Here's what he said, and how relevant it is for our very day right now. In this Sargasso sea of fantasy and fraud, How can I or anyone else hope to swim unencumbered? How can I learn to see through and not with the eye? How take off my own motley and wash away the makeup? Raise the iron curtain and put out the studio lights? Silence the sound effects and put the cameras to sleep? Can I ever watch the sunrise on Sunset Boulevard and set over Forest Lawn? Read truth of an auto cue, catch it on a screen, chase it on the wings of Muzak? Can I view it in living color with the news, hear it in living sound along the motorways? No, not in the wind that rent the mountains and broke in pieces the rocks. Again and again and again, that still small voice, if one could only catch it. And in his book, The Green Stick, A Chronicle of Wasted Years, he goes on to refer to that voice as the voice of God.
24-hour news is one of the worst inventions of the past 30 years, in my opinion. But one thing it does give us is plenty of evidence that human beings are horribly imperfect, that we can't be our own solution because we are the problem. And Jesus makes that exact statement in contradistinction to every other worldview that's out there that says you can save yourself. You know, in fact, from this very institution, and a number of professors here, they issued this wonderful statement. My colleague Alicia Wood forwarded me this statement about thinking for yourself. Maybe you've seen the document. If you haven't, I urge you to read it. I don't know what the title of it is, but a number of professors from this university and other Ivy League universities have said, think for yourself. Don't just be a rebel, but also think for yourself. And I'm trying to instill that into my children at an early age so that they actually own their faith, not so that they just repeat what Dad said. So there's that freedom you've talked about now, because God gives us the dignity of difference, the dignity of differing with even Him. And there's that free will element to it. He asked the question, how beautiful do the words have to be before they conquer every heart? And the answer is simply this: there are no words as beautiful as possible to overcome someone's free will. And God has given us, I think, the dignity of actual free will to where the beauty of what He says is indeed beautiful. We might even recognize the beauty of it, as some who have rejected Him have actually recognized, but say, I don't want it because there's consequences. And they think only temporal consequences. The human heart is a very, very complicated thing. The human mind is a very complicated thing. Yes, science is important, and all these wonderful things. And this is, by the way, I know it's a rambling answer, but you had so much deeply packed into that incredibly important question. You mentioned science. The Christian faith is not anti-science. In fact, when you read Proverbs chapter 25, verse 2, it says it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but it is the glory of kings to seek it out. God doesn't keep things from us so that we never know them. He keeps things from us, He conceals them temporarily so that we can delight in the discovery of finding them.
A sense of wonder or a sense of awe. We always look for that. When you walk out and look at that starry sky, you look at it, it is what Immanuel Kant said, talked about that the two wonderful things, the starry hosts above and the moral law within. But this spectacular view that you can see in a night sky. I remember one of the astronauts with NASA who was a pilot on one of the missions into space. He and two of his colleagues left Houston and came to visit our office because he'd been listening to one of my CDs while he was in space, on the CD entitled, Who is God? And he said, every time I looked at my window and looked at that blue little speck we call our home, Earth, I was stricken with awe and wonder on what a minute part of this vast universe it is, but how spectacular it really is.
The truth does set you free because it tells you who you really are. And the resurrection is a true fact of history that tells you what you really are. And what it tells you that you really are is that you are not a chemical machine. I can attest to you that the very things that I once thought were silly about the gospel, I actually found to be so profound that I'm almost embarrassed that I found them silly before. In fact, He blocks the perfect disk of the sun with the perfectly sized and distanced moon exactly over that to conceal the light of the sun so that we can actually prove Einstein's theory of general relativity that light would bend around a massive solar object, and it is the eclipse that allowed us to do that. God conceals something so that we can discover it, quite literally a fulfillment of Proverbs 25, verse 2. And then you look at that, and then the resurrection of Jesus, and He says, what you are is not a chemical machine. The fact that you can do science at all and use your reasoning proves that you are not a meat computer. You actually apply something more to it than that, because the Bible says you are made in God's image and you have value. Here's why I think this is all important. I'm going to wrap it up and I'm going to stop, I promise. The truth that sets you free is that you are free to be what you were meant to be. And you were meant to be a being who was fashioned and created in the image of God. And that you and I have value. A blind, pitiless, indifferent universe that Dawkins describes neither knows nor cares about you or me. And you have no value, no objective value beyond human opinion in an atheistic framework. Jesus says you have an immeasurable value. And how do you know how valuable anything is? You know how valuable something is by what you're willing to pay for it. And the resurrection and the crucifixion shows me that you and I have an immeasurable value on an objective basis, because the immeasurable God paid an immeasurable price to spend an immeasurable eternity with you and with me. You are free to be who you are because of what he did.
When Jesus stood before Pilate, it's a grim scene. Pilate looks at him and says, "Are you the king?" Pilate says, "Are you asking this on your own, or has somebody else set you up for it?" Isn't it fascinating how Jesus always questions his questioners to open them up within their own assumptions? Are you asking this on your own, or has somebody else set you up to ask me? You know, the reason is because intent is prior to content. To give truth to somebody who loves it not, says George MacDonald, is to only give them more multiplied reasons for misinterpretation. You give truth to somebody who doesn't love it, all you're giving them is more ammunition to misinterpret what it is that you've actually said. And then finally, Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world, Pilate. If it were, my soldiers would have fought to defend me and protect me, keep me from this arrest." Pilate says, "You are a king then?" Jesus said, "Yes. For this cause did I come into the world, to testify to the truth, and they that are on the side of truth listen to me." Pilate asked the most important question of his life, but did not wait for the answer. He said, "What is truth?" and turned around and walked away. Don't make that mistake. Don't make that mistake. If you really pursue the truth, find out what the truth says, where it is leading you, and be willing to go in that direction.